When we think about our start of our nation, we all naturally think about the Declaration of Independence and the 4th of July. That day was critical and serves as the official start of the struggle for our nation and liberty. But as we all know, nothing happens by itself or in a vacuum. Prior to the Declaration of Independence, there were many altercations and actions that restricted our natural God-given rights. There were unfair taxes, no representation, unjust taking of property, just to name a few. Our nation has been in the our nation was in the formative stages of exerting their rights to have our rights respected. We had petitioned and pleaded with the powers that were to respect and recognize what we held dear. But those pleas and petitions fell on deaf ears. On April 19, 1775, in Concord and Lexington, the state of Massachusetts, units of the regular army of Great Britain were ordered to seek to find and destroy the munitions and supplies of the infant organization that was to become the United States of America. They were unsuccessful in their task and retreated back to Boston from a determined defense from the Patriots. This was the first recorded organized effort to defend with force our rights as a nation, and thus set off a movement that has since become the model for democracy in the world. Today we remember and celebrate the efforts and sacrifices that were made on that day, and every day afterwards that has led to where we are now, a free country that can stand together, voice our opinions, and exert our collective will to uphold our God-given rights. It's often been said that freedom is not free, and it all started in a small town in rural backwoods, Massachusetts. When you go home today, offer a small prayer for those who give the ultimate sacrifice, and remember when it started. We're very privileged to have today Mr. Howe Rams, a noted historian and legal scholar who has, on more than one occasion, regaled us with those early days in history. And I can see today that he's going to do it again. Mr. Howe, thank you very much.
Thank you. Mayor Taylor introduced the events actually happening on April 19th. And that's why April 19th is designated and celebrated more in some other states than in Tennessee as Patriots Day. Reggie's the fellow who actually germinated this idea that we should start honoring it here. And I was enthusiastically taken away with the idea. So what I'd like to do is ask you, if this is about patriots, what is the difference between a patriot then and a patriot today? Do we still have patriots like that? And to me, it seems that one of the ways that we can find out best about whether we have the stuff that made this country great is to look at what was actually happening then and compare it to what's happening now. And that's why I went on eBay and found this. This is an actual newspaper. This piece of paper was printed in 1774 in London, England. And it reveals the things that people were looking at back then. And it makes some references to things that were going on in the American colonies. When we're looking at this particular piece of paper, we have to realize how they got their news. There were no satellites or even telegraphs. When they got their news from Europe, it was from a ship that came across the English Channel after it had been driven by horses and carriages from Russia and all the other parts of the world. And when they got word from the New World, from the British colonies, it was after a ship had come across the Atlantic Ocean, taking weeks with sail power to get there. So this news is really news to the people that were living then. What we have noted on this particular paper, it's a total of 4 two-sided pages. And it starts out with a discussion about the Constitution of France. Now, that was important to the people in London because right up here it talks about Louis XVI, who just in May, again, this was published in August of 1774. In May, Louis XVI had taken the throne of France. And just an excerpt there, it says that the present majesty of France, Louis XVI, in the early part of his education, gave uncommon proofs of possessing a lively genius. He married in 1770 Princess Maria Antoinette, of Austria. He succeeded to the throne May of 1774, just 4 months before this. And he has since conducted himself in such a manner in that critical situation that there has been no cause for his neighbors to worry of his conduct, which seems by no means intended to disturb the present tranquility of Europe, but to contribute to the happiness of his subjects by giving every encouragement in his power to agriculture, commerce, and manufactures. Now, think about what happened in the next 15 years in France. The turmoil between the aristocracy and the commons led to increasing tensions and ultimately to the French Revolution, where he and Marie Antoinette were decapitated by guillotines, and the European world was thrown into turmoil as Napoleon ultimately took over and conquered most of Europe. So this peaceful and happy forecast of what they expected turned horribly dirty. Here in Russia, there's an article from Russia, Petersburg, July 8th. And you notice, August 4th to July 8th is how long it took the news to get to London, about a plague of horses in Petersburg. It was interesting to the people in. Of course, horsepower back then was horse power. Right? So here's an article about a fella in Yorkshire, an inn holder who is going to surrender August 10th because he had gone bankrupt. They had debtor's prison. Going to the next page, you've all heard of the stamp tax?
Yep.
There is the stamp on this particular newspaper. This is the kind that they had to pay, in this case a halfpenny, because they would publish that particular newspaper. Over here, we have a new journal announced that will be for sale in England. And this one is interesting because it's called The American Patriot. And in the first issue, they have a most beautiful engraving of the celebrated Dr. Benjamin Franklin. Now, Benjamin Franklin had just been, or was still, the Postmaster General of the American colonies on behalf of the British Crown. He was soon after this going to be fired because he had revealed some secret letters that he had come across in England that were discussing affairs important to the American colonies. In this particular section, they have an article. It says, Riley's new invented spelling cards, executed upon a plan entirely new, with a design to engage the attention of young children and lead them to form an early and correct taste for reading English. And all I can think of is Common Core. Always looking for a better way to educate people, all right? Pages, over here, these are the lottery results, the state lottery.
Oh, we still got that.
We still have that. So we go further. It's just more of this kind of thing, advertisements and interesting articles on the next page. And then in this page, we begin to get to things that are somewhat interesting. Up here, and I'm reading from this because it's easier to read the big print, there's an intelligence or foreign intelligence coming in from The Hague on July 29th. They write from Warsaw that they are at a loss to know where the claims of the three Allied powers in Poland will end. The Austrians having extended their limits on the side of Moldova much further than they at first pretended to have any right to, and the Prussians have lately extended their line within 8 miles of Warsaw. The Danzigers are determined to sacrifice their blood in defense of their liberties, but it is feared they cannot resist to any purpose. Now, there's some names here that we think of as ancient history. But you know what Moldova is? It was a country that was broken up in 1859. And today, part of what that country was is known as Ukraine. And here it was being invaded by a power that kept stretching beyond what it originally said it was interested in. Danzig, the city on Poland's coast, was the first target Hitler made when he made war on Poland in 1939. So these pieces of news in the 1770s echoed into our days. It's just, it's hard to understand that. Now, we go into the actual postscript, News from America in London. The following advices are just received from Boston in New England. And then they have several different dates shown. And I'll go through them, my copy here. When the Boston Tea Party had been done and all that stuff thrown in the harbor, the immediate reaction of Parliament was to impose the Intolerable Acts, which included the Boston Port Act and several other acts, but specifically the Boston Port Act shut down the port of Boston. The people around Boston all got their living from trade. Until they had turned in the people who threw the tea in the harbor, paid the tea tax and so on, they were being punished by Parliament by having their port shut. And so that was in December of 1773. Now by June 16th, here's the report from Boston. Most of the stores on the Long Wharf are now shut up. Hundreds of the poor are out of employ, and many who live genteelly will soon be reduced to the last shilling. Yet under these unhappy circumstances, people in general have that fortitude which did honor to the ancient Romans. Undaunted by tyrants, will die or be free. A People's Congress seems now to be the voice of all the colonies from Nova Scotia to Georgia. They are noting this beginning organization of the colonies' unauthorized self-government. Certainly the besieged inhabitants of Boston can have no temptations to lose a moment in this occasion. And last Wednesday, Governor Wentworth dissolved the General Assembly of New Hampshire. Now a later dispatch, Boston, June 20th. Tuesday last, the 4th, or King's Own Regiment, landed at the Long Wharf and marched into the Common, as on Wednesday did the 43rd. Both regiments are now encamped in the Common, which is essentially like Central Park to New York. So here are growing forces barracked in the midst of these Bostonians who are trying to survive and still keep their freedom. Boston, June 23rd. The late Honorable House of Representatives of this province, having finished all the ordinary public business of importance that had been before them, on Friday last came to the following resolutions. There are 3 resolutions. The first one says, whereas this House, taking into consideration the many distresses and difficulties to which the American colonies, and this province in particular, are and must be reduced by the operation of certain late acts of Parliament, have determined that it is highly expedient that a committee should be appointed to meet as soon as may be the committees that are or shall be appointed by the several colonies on this continent, to consult together upon the present state of the colonies and to deliberate and determine upon wise and proper measures to be by them recommended to all of the colonies for the recovery and establishment of their just rights and liberties, civil and religious, and the restoration of that union and harmony between Great Britain and the colonies most ardently desired by all good men. So they're trying to fight for their liberties and still keep their loyalty to the king and his government. Then it appoints several people to this committee that they're going to send to meet the other colonies. Among them are Sam Adams and John Adams. There's also a statement in here about how the House petitioned or passed a resolution that the delegates would be funded on their expedition to the Continental Congress, what became the Continental Congress. And the governor rejected that payment. So now they're soliciting the other towns and so on around Boston to help pay the way of John Adams and Sam Adams to the growing Continental Congress. The second resolution, whereas the towns of Boston and Charlestown are at this time suffering under the hand of power by the shutting up of the harbor by an armed force, which in the opinions of this House is an invasion of the said towns, evidently designed to compel the inhabitants thereof to a submission to taxes imposed upon them without their consent. And whereas it appears to this House that this attack upon the said towns for the purpose aforesaid is an attack made upon this whole province and continent, which threatens the destruction of the liberties of all British America. It is therefore resolved as the clear opinion of this House that the inhabitants of the said towns ought to be relieved, and this House do recommend to all. And more specifically to the inhabitants of this province, to afford them speedy and constant relief in such way and manner as shall be most suitable to their circumstance, till the sense and advice of our sister colonies shall be known, in full confidence that they will exhibit examples of patience, fortitude, and perseverance while they are thus called to endure oppression for the preservation of their liberties and their country. And then the third resolution, whereas this and His Majesty's other colonies in North America have long been struggling under the heavy hand of power, and our dutiful petitions for the redress of our intolerable grievances have not only been disregarded and frowned upon, but the design totally to alter the free constitution of civil government in the British colonies and establish arbitrary governments and reduce the inhabitants to slavery appears more and more to be fixed and determined. It is thereby strongly recommended by this House to the inhabitants of the province that they renounce altogether the consumption of India teas and of all goods and manufactures, whatever, from Great Britain, until the public grievances of America shall be radically and totally redressed. And it is also further recommended to all that they give all public encouragement to the manufacturers of America. So they're trying to solve the problem by boycotts and buying American. And then it goes down and describes the response of the appointed governor, because their governor had been taken away. The new governor was General Gage, who was in charge of those troops. Right? So now he's in charge, and he's aware of these resolves. And last Friday, His Excellency the Governor, having directed the Secretary to acquaint the two houses that it was his pleasure the General Assembly should be dissolved, and to declare the same dissolved accordingly, the Secretary went to the courthouse, and finding the door of the Representatives' chamber locked, directed the messenger to go in and acquaint the Speaker that the Secretary had a message from His Excellency to the Honorable House, and desired he might be admitted to deliver it. The messenger returned and said he acquainted the Speaker therewith, who mentioned it to the House, and their orders were to keep the door locked. Whereupon the following proclamation was published on the stairs, announced on the stairs, leading to the Representatives' chamber, in presence of several members of the House and a great number of other persons. And then there's the province of Massachusetts Bay by the governor, a proclamation for dissolving the General Court, the Assembly. Whereas the proceedings of the House of Representatives in the present session of the General Court make it necessary for His Majesty's service that the said General Court should be dissolved. I have therefore thought fit to dissolve the said General Court, and the same is hereby dissolved accordingly. Signed by General Thomas Gage. So now the people of Boston have lost not only their income, but their power to self-govern. This is happening in July. The news gets to London in August. And at the end of August, what happened was General Gage sent troops up the Mystic River to a little town called Somerville, where the stores of the munitions in that community were all gathered for the Patriots, for their militia to protect themselves against Indians as well as other threats. All those arms were removed and brought back to Boston. It was called the powder alarm, and it had taken the colonists by surprise. In response, they developed an alarm network that was led by a guy named Paul Revere. And over the course of the next winter, things quieted down during the cold weather and so on. But as April came, tensions mounted again. And it was on April 19th that General Gage sent out another batch of troops to go get another store of arms in Concord. And that was the day that 70 Patriots stood across the entrance to the Lexington Bridge and met 700 Redcoats. And amidst indecision and somebody firing a wild shot, then there was an exchange of fire. Men on both sides fell, and our revolution had begun. So now the question is, when you see these pieces of news, and you compare them to the news that we're watching today, you know that the people reading these things, the people writing them, they had no idea what their future would bring. In America, they had no idea that their way of handling these challenges was going to create a whole new nation with a whole new way of looking at how people should be governed. Those are the patriots of that day. Look inside yourselves and tell me, are you the same people? Do you even know? We don't know what's in our future. I hope that we have the patriotism that they had back then. And so the way I'd like to express that is if you would all join me in pledging the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. Happy Patriots Day.